Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the frozen, pine-scented silence of a Finnish forest, where the snow hushes your footsteps and the air tastes like bark and fire. A curl of smoke slithers above the trees, beckoning you like a crooked finger. You follow it past leaning birches and stones shaped like sleeping bears until you see it, a tiny hut with a moss roof, one crooked window glowing orange. There's no sign on the door, of course. Just a few bundles of twigs, some feathers, and bones tied with red string. Inside is a witch, a real one. No broom, no hat, just wiry gray hair tied in a knot fur-lined boots, and a look in her eyes that suggests she's already measured your soul and found it a bit undercooked. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these little stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the doorway, a little snow melting on your shoulders as the witch mutters something and waves a birch whisk. The scent of smoke broth and something faintly metallic seeps from the hearth. She gestures you in, not warmly, but decisively, as though this was never your choice. The floor is packed earth covered in woven rush mats. Dried herbs dangle like wind chimes above the door, and a fat gray cat with one ear snores on the bench. Outside, it's early morning, but here it always feels like twilight. There's no clock, only the gentle hiss of a simmering pot and the soft thunk of a ladle stirring marrow broth. The forest witch, you'll soon learn, does not serve cereal or toast. Breakfast here begins with frost and ends with memory loss. She speaks little, but everything about her kitchen tells stories. A pot carved from a single reindeer skull spoons with bird-shaped handles and rows of clay jars that seem to breathe softly. In the corner sits a bundle of old fur, which might be a chair. Or it might have been the last guest who didn't clean their plate. Now, here's your first mainstream fact. Many Finnish folk tales from the Karelia and Lapland regions do include solitary women in the woods, often labeled noita, which is roughly translated as witch. These figures were healers, spiritual intermediaries, and yes, cooks. They were feared and sought out in equal measure. But here's a quirky side note. Some of these witches claim to be able to smell lies cooking, not hear them. Smell them. Imagine dodging that over breakfast. You edge closer to the hearth, and she pushes a fur-lined stool toward you with her boot. No words, just a glance that says sit or leave. You sit. She lifts the lid of the first cauldron with a claw-handled hook. A savory cloud of steam rolls over your face, thick gamey with a whisper of pine. Inside is bone broth. Not just any bones. These have runes scratched into them. Reindeer, elk boar, some marked with tiny burn notches that look like counting or curses. She ladles some into a stone bowl and places it before you. No spoon. You sip it like tea, the warmth crawling into your fingers. It tastes like ancient winters. There's a hint of birch bark in it, which isn't your imagination. Birch was historically used in Finnish soups and teas for both flavor and supposed medicinal power. Historians still argue whether these witches cooked only for themselves or if they fed whole communities during sacred rituals. Some claim these breakfasts were private spells. Others say they were offerings to gods, to ghosts, or to the woods themselves. You look down and see your breath still fogging. The soup has warmed you, but not the air. She hasn't spoken, but she's started preparing something else, grinding something with a long stone pestle. Maybe roots, maybe teeth. Best not to ask yet. The sun barely rises in this part of the world in winter. The forest stays dim, blue-gray, and eternal. Your stomach growls again. You hope whatever's next doesn't bite back. You hear the snap of frozen marrow as the witch uses a hatchet to crack open an elk bone the size of your arm. She doesn't flinch when a drop of warm broth hisses onto the coals. With quick practice movements, she scrapes the inside of the bone into a wooden bowl already half filled with birch sap. You expected a bitter smell, but the scent is unexpectedly rich, earthy, almost sweet, like caramel soaked in forest fog. She ladles some of this mixture back into the cauldron, muttering what might be a recipe or might be a threat. Hard to say. The Finnish dialect she speaks is so old, it predates verbs as we know them. Bone broth wasn't just a hearty start to the day, it was in many ways a survival serum. In traditional Finnish cuisine, especially among the Sami people of the north, every part of the animal was used, and the marrow was prized. It contained fat, warmth, and superstition. Drink enough of it, and you wouldn't just be warm, you'd be protected from cold, from spirits, and from whatever waited outside the circle of firelight. She reaches for a dried stalk hanging over the stove. It looks like stringy celery, but it's meadowsweet, known historically for its medicinal uses. She crumbles some in, then adds a pinch of crushed pine needle. Everything smells like a memory you can't quite place. That's when she points a finger at you and says, "Your first word of the morning tastes better if you stir it with your own finger." You hesitate. Surely she's joking. She is not joking. With a sigh that puffs out steam, you dip a clean finger in and give the mixture a slow swirl. The surface tension clings. It feels thicker than it looks and colder. The witch nods approvingly and goes back to scraping what looks like dried lichen into a second pot. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some forest witches believed that broth stirred by another person's body heat would carry their shadow thoughts, their dreams, fears, even secrets into the stew. It was how they claimed to read you. Like palm reading, but via spoonful. She hands you a hunk of chewy flatbread. It's not really for eating. It's more like a texture experiment somewhere between a cracker and bark. But you chew obediently. It tastes faintly of juniper. Behind you, something shifts on the shelf. You look over your shoulder. Just jars stacked 3 deep. One of them fogs up as if sighing. Maybe it's just the temperature difference. Maybe. The witch opens a small tin and flicks in something dark and powdery. Maybe charcoal, maybe something else. She doesn't explain. You've figured out she never does. Meanwhile, the pot simmers on. She pulls out another bone, smaller this time, and starts carving a groove into it with a crooked knife. There's a rhythm to her work, like she's scoring a song into the bone. She taps it 3 times on the rim of the pot and sets it aside. Breakfast isn't just for hunger, she finally mutters. Her voice is like tree bark, dry layered, a little creaky. It's for armor. That's your mainstream historical fact for the section in many pre-modern cultures, particularly in the Arctic and subarctic zones. Meals were understood not just as nutrition, but as protection. The properties of each ingredient, heat, fat, ash, sweetness, were believed to offer more than bodily fuel. They shaped your fate, your mood, your chances with wolves, or worse. Historians still argue whether this blending of food and ritual was purely symbolic or had medicinal logic. After all, birch sap is mildly anti-inflammatory, and marrow is a powerhouse of nutrients. But when it's served by a woman with elk teeth on a necklace, it's hard to feel like you're just getting vitamins. You finish your bowl, or maybe it finishes you. You're not entirely sure. She takes it from you, turns it over, and peers at the underside. You try not to ask what she sees. Some things are better left unread. Then she says something unexpected. Good. That'll keep the frost off your heart. You chuckle nervously. She doesn't. She begins preparing another course, something flatter, sizzling. But for now, the broth lingers inside you, glowing faintly. You feel, in a strange way, full. The witch moves toward the hearth, dragging a round, soot-darkened stone slab from beneath a layer of ash. It's not metal, not cast iron, just a hunk of volcanic rock, polished flat by years of cooking, and likely rituals you're better off not knowing. She tosses a handful of coarse buckwheat flour onto the stone, followed by a splash of well-aged milk, a pinch of salt, and most curiously, a flick of ash from the corner of the hearth. You don't ask what that last part is for. You already suspect the answer is warding off misfortune or binding breakfast to your spirit, or something equally unsettling. With fingers gnarled as pine roots, she pats the mixture into a thin, lumpy disc. Then she begins chanting. The words are soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung by someone who's never seen a crib. As she flips the pancake, her voice lowers. She draws a spiral into the air with her spoon, and yes, you swear, the batter crisps a little faster as if obeying. This isn't just breakfast anymore. This is breakfast with enchantments. Historically, buckwheat pancakes have long been a staple in Finnish rural cuisine. Known as blinet in eastern Finland, thanks to Russian influence, these pancakes were hearty filling and ideal for harsh winters. But you're pretty sure the ones from those village cookbooks didn't involve arcane geometry and flickering shadow puppets dancing on the walls. She flips the pancake once more, only this time she doesn't use the spatula. She lifts it midair with a gust of breath. The disc floats, turns, lands softly. You blink, thinking it must have been a trick of the firelight. She doesn't even acknowledge it. You're handed one fresh off the slab, still steaming. The texture is uneven, crispy on the outside, gummy in the middle, but it smells like comfort. Warm grain, smoky butter, and something faintly like apples, though you don't see any fruit. You take a bite. It's chewy, deeply nutty, and earthy. There's a mild tang from fermented milk, and just as your brain registers that flavor, a second bite tastes completely different, sweet, almost honeyed. That's the spell she says without looking up. The flavors change with your thoughts. You pause mid-bite, testing the theory. You think of your childhood. The pancake turned sour. You think of your last breakup. The bite that follows is bitter. You think of a warm bath and a cat purring in your lap. That next bite tastes like honeycomb. Whether it's your mind playing along or actual magic doesn't matter. It's working. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some Finnish folk witches believed in flavor echoes the idea that food could mirror a person's emotional state or recent sins. Meals weren't just nourishment, they were diagnostics. If your stew turned sour, maybe you had guilt. If your bread wouldn't rise, maybe someone in the village had cursed you. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were widespread or practiced only in isolated rural enclaves. But numerous early ethnographic accounts from 19th century Finland mention tasting omens during meal prep, especially in forests where nature spirits were considered nosy dinner guests. The witch makes another pancake, this one smaller, and shaped a little like a mushroom. She doesn't eat hers. Instead, she places it on a slab of wood carved with runes, which she sets by the window. You realize that's her offering plate. To whom or what you do not ask. Then, without warning, she hands you a flat wooden circle with tiny dots carved around its edge. Spin this, she says, and stop it with your finger. Whatever it lands on is the topping. You do as instructed. The circle spins with a dry whir, slowing until your finger stops on a symbol resembling a teardrop. She nods and scoops a dollop of something purplish-gray from a clay bowl. It shimmers faintly in the firelight. Blueberry and crow's breath, she explains, as if that's a normal phrase. The topping is sweet, with a hint of something sharp and mineral like sucking on a coin. You try not to think about what crow's breath actually is. The pancake is now gone, but you feel full in a new way, like you've been fed more than food, like something inside you has changed, just slightly tuned to a new frequency. Behind you, a kettle begins to hiss. More breakfast is coming, but so are more questions. The kettle over the coals begins to sing high and shrill like a bird, warning you not to trust what comes next. The witch doesn't rush. She reaches for a rough cloth sack and pulls out a small bundle wrapped in waxed bark. Inside is a fragrant mix of scorched juniper twigs, crumbled spruce needles, and something dark and oily that squishes slightly when she breaks it apart. She adds a pinch to the kettle and the scent transforms instantly, bitterness layered over forest sweetness. You recognize it as coffee, but not any kind you've known. No plastic pods, no hipster foam art. This is Taikakavi Witch's Brew Juniper Coffee, call it what you like. It smells both ancient and medicinal, like it could either wake you up or reset your entire nervous system. Coffee arrived in Finland in the 1700s, but the witch doesn't follow those timelines. She insists this blend came from a raven that once drank thunder. You decide not to ask for sourcing details. She pours the coffee into a thick clay mug. It's lumpy and warm in your hands, clearly shaped by fingers rather than wheels. There's no cream, no sugar, just black, steaming liquid that smells like a midnight forest walk during a thunderstorm. You sip? It's strong, eye-wateringly bitter, smoky, and sour in a good way, like burnt wood and berry skins. There's also something herbal like thyme, or... no, wait, that's something else entirely. You feel your pupils dilate. Just a little. She watches you with amusement. It's good for the eyes, she says, nodding toward the rafters. That's when you notice the owl. It's been there the whole time, silent and enormous, tucked into the thatch above the hearth. Its eyes are golden and round, staring down at you without blinking. You try not to choke on your next sip. Owl watches truth, she adds. Coffee reveals it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Finnish coffee culture is one of the most deeply rooted in the world. Per capita, Finns drink more coffee than any other country. Traditionally, it's consumed several times a day, often light roasted and with pastries, but forest folk, especially in isolated regions, had their own bitter blends using local ingredients when beans were scarce or expensive. Now, for your quirky fringe tidbit. Some Karelian witches claimed that drinking juniper-infused coffee in the presence of an owl allowed you to see behind your own name, meaning to glimpse a past life or recognize the shape of fate. You're not sure what that means, but the owl hasn't blinked once. The witch takes a sip from her own cup and for the first time smiles. "Now you see better," she says, "even the parts you shouldn't." You nod slowly. You're not sure if it's the coffee or the owl, but the shadows in the room seem more layered now. Textured. The rug beneath your feet appears to ripple once before settling. Probably just the caffeine. Probably. Historians still argue whether these kinds of rituals were everyday practice or later romanticized by ethnographers looking for folkloric spice. Some records suggest witches drank these brews during trance work or healing sessions, not breakfast. Others say it was their breakfast because you don't face a day of hexing and herb gathering with a dry mouth and weak tea. You finish the coffee. The witch takes your mug, turns it upside down over a plate, and peers at the drips running down the sides. She traces a few with her finger frowns and grunts. Unclear, she mutters, "Maybe try again later, after berries." You don't know what that means either, but she's already busy with the next phase of the meal. She opens a small tin with a rusty clasp. Inside are pale yellow granules, dried egg perhaps, but no. She taps the edge and a few dusty flakes fall into her palm. She blows on them and they vanish. Not melt, not scatter. Vanish. What was that, you ask? Memory, she shrugs. Leftover from someone else, not yours. You're about to reply when you hear a soft hoot from above. The owl blinks, just once. You don't sip again. You just sit back and let the warmth of the juniper coffee seep into your bones. It's not just a drink. It's a mirror, and you're not sure you like what you saw. The next thing she does is vanish for a moment, literally. One blink, and she's not in the room. Just the hiss of firewood and the lingering scent of scorched juniper. You glance at the owl. It does not reassure you. But then she's back emerging from a shadow near the wall that hadn't been there before. In her hands is a blackened loaf the size of a baby badger. She sets it on a flat stone and cracks it open with a bone-handled knife. A puff of warm steam rolls out smelling of roasted grain, wood smoke, and something strangely metallic. It's rye. Of course it is. The backbone of Finnish bread, since people were naming rivers and sleeping on straw. Dense, heavy, unforgiving. A single slice could double as a roof shingle or a murder weapon, and this one looks particularly ancient, like it remembers kings who no longer have names. She cuts you a slab and drops it onto a wooden plate scorched with tiny spirals. No butter, no jam, just bread. Then she reaches for a pinch of powder from a nearby jar and sprinkles it over the top. Dream salt, she explains, as if that's a common pantry item. You eye the granules. They're grayish, slightly iridescent, like they've been harvested from a place that doesn't follow our laws of physics. They taste faintly of brine and licorice and maybe ashes. The salt crunches between your teeth with a little static pop. She says keeps the bad ones out. You assume she means nightmares, though something in her tone implies she's talking about more than just dreams. Now your mainstream historical fact rye bread has been a Finnish staple for centuries. Known as risleipä, it was traditionally baked in large round loaves with holes in the middle so they could be hung on poles near the ceiling to dry. Some families baked just once or twice a year, making enough loaves to survive the long winter. But what you've been handed is no ordinary loaf. It's crusted with fine black soot, which she claims comes not from the oven, but from the breath of a fire spirit who likes to nibble while it bakes. Right. Your quirky tidbit in some regions of Karelia witches supposedly sang salt into bread, using chants to bind dreams into the grain. The salt used was sometimes collected from the skin after a long sleep believed to carry dream residue. No one knows if that's the origin of dream salt, but you're quietly praying this batch came from the ocean instead of someone's forehead. The flavor deepens as you chew. First, just rye-rich dark, a little sour. Then a flash of something. Sweet, no bitter. It's memory-flavored. You get the distinct impression that the bread has opinions, mostly about your posture. You glance at the witch. She's slicing her own piece thinner than yours. She eats slowly, chewing each bite like it contains a story. She tells you between bites about the time a fox tricked her out of her best batch of dream salt. Left nothing but footprints and guilt, she mutters. Still haven't forgiven him. You're not entirely sure she's joking. There's a fox skull hanging from the rafters. She pours a little water into a bowl, sprinkles in more salt, and dips her fingers. You do too, she says. Wash before the next bite. Clears the tongue of lies. Historians still argue whether this salt ritual cleansing was symbolic or spiritual hygiene. Some say it was akin to a palate cleanser. Others believe it was meant to unbind the energy of previous foods, allowing the next item to act independently. Food magic, in short, was not just about what went into your mouth, but also about what remained unseen between bites. You follow her instructions, dipping your fingers and touching them briefly to your tongue. The water is cold, sharp, tinged with something like mint and moss. She nods satisfied and hands you another item, a little bark cup filled with soft gray paste. You don't ask what it is. You just taste. It's bland, slightly sweet, and deeply strange, like oatmeal made from cloud and regret. It clings to your mouth and then slowly fades, leaving behind the aftertaste of pine nuts and dust. She watches closely as you eat, not in judgment, but in study. Bread tells me who you are, she says. Paste tells me what you'll be. You finish the last bite slowly. The dream salt has dissolved on your lips. The room feels quieter. Even the owl seems subdued. And outside the window, snow begins to fall in slow, silent spirals, as though the forest is gently exhaling. The witch reaches for a basket tucked into the crook of a crooked beam. Everything in this hut seems just a little bent, as if the forest itself got involved in its design. From beneath a layer of straw, she draws out a handful of pale eggs, each one dotted with tiny brown flecks. But these aren't fresh from this morning, or even this week. These were laid on solstice, she says, holding one up to the light like a gemstone. Only those make a true winter breakfast. The winter solstice, when night swallows day, and the forest doesn't blink for 24 hours, isn't just a turning point in the year. In the witch's world, it's a magical bottleneck, a liminal hourglass where time slows and strange things drip through, including apparently eggs. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In pre-modern Finland, the winter solstice was a time of intense ritual significance. Though not all traditions focused on food, it was believed that livestock and fowl responded to the shifting light with changes in behavior, laying fewer eggs, producing less milk, or growing anxious. Any egg laid on solstice was considered rare, and some communities treated them as omens, not groceries. The witch cracks one of these sacred eggs into a carved wooden bowl. The yolk is unnaturally golden, almost orange and viscous, like syrup. She gives it a stir with a sliver of birch and adds what looks like dried dandelion fluff and a whisper of crushed juniper. You think this is chicken, she asks. You begin to nod, then stop. She smiles with all her teeth. It isn't. You don't press the issue. As she begins poaching the eggs in a shallow dish over embers, you notice a small cage tucked behind a basket of herbs. Something feathery blinks from within, definitely not a chicken, possibly not a bird. Now for your quirky tidbit, some forest witches were rumored to breed a peculiar bird known only as Lumivati Snow Watcher. It wasn't found in the wild, never seen flying, and supposedly laid a single egg each year, always on the darkest day. These eggs were believed to contain the distilled mood of the winter bitterness, clarity, stillness, hunger. Eat one and you'd understand what the forest was thinking. She serves the poached egg on a plank of toasted bark. Not a plate, just a long, clean strip of birch with a few thumb-sized burns near the edges, perhaps from previous breakfasts, perhaps from previous guests. The egg tastes like butter and wood smoke, but there's something else too, a flicker of spice or maybe memory. You swallow and feel your limbs tingle faintly, like blood returning after long stillness. Solstice eggs wake up the bones, she mutters, fanning the embers with a bunch of pine needles. Yours were sleeping loud. You nod, not knowing what that means, but unwilling to argue. She picks up another egg, taps it gently on a stone, and lets the contents pour, not into the pan, but onto the floor. The cat slinks from under the bench and laps at it silently. You ask if that one was bad. Not for me, she says without elaborating. Historians still argue whether these egg rituals were real practices or symbolic flourishes added by later storytellers. Some say witches used eggs for divination, cracking them into water and reading the whites like tea leaves. Others insist the solstice timing was everything. Eggs from that day were saved for births, deaths, and important meals. Breakfasts that decided more than just how your day started. You take another bite, savoring the soft yolk and the crisp bark beneath it. There's no seasoning, and yet it tastes full like snowmelt and hearths like things that live in stillness. The owl shifts above you. A single feather drops to the floor. The witch catches it mid-air without looking and tucks it behind your ear. For listening, she says, not hearing, listening. And then she's gone again just for a blink. But when your vision clears, she's by the next pot stirring something that smells like jam and pine. Breakfast isn't over, not even close. She lifts the lid on a small pot near the coals, and a burst of red steam escapes sharp tart alive. You lean forward expecting fruit, and you're right. It's lingonberries. But these aren't sweetened or simmered into a cozy compote. These are mashed raw with some kind of animal fat until they gleam like rubies trapped in candle wax. She plops a dollop onto your wooden plate beside the remains of your solstice egg. Then she reaches for a small, curved utensil. It's not metal. It's not even wood. It's bone-polished reindeer bone, gleaming with age, carved with shallow swirls that almost move if you stare too long. She hands it to you without ceremony. Don't scrape too deep, she warns. The bowl remembers. You nod and scoop up the lingonberry butter. It resists slightly thick and cold, but melts the second it touches the warmth of the egg. The color spreads scarlet on gold, like a painting you're about to eat. Your first taste puckers your mouth sour punchy with a hint of iron. Then the fat rolls in soft and rich. The combination is unexpectedly perfect, wild, wintry, and primal. Here's your mainstream historical fact: lingonberries are a staple in Nordic diets, especially in Finland. Tart and packed with vitamin C, they were often used to prevent scurvy during long winters. Mixed with butter or animal fat, they became both a preservative and a spreadable delight, especially when sugar was scarce or rationed. She watches you eat, then nods approvingly. That one's honest, she says. Some people flinch, some spit. You ask what happens to those people. She shrugs. They don't come back. Or they do, but not right. Now your quirky tidbit in forest folklore berries weren't just food, they were tests. Witches used them to gauge a guest's soul. Sourness reflected bitterness. Sweetness suggested desire. A balanced reaction meant well-grounded spirit. If someone tasted only one thing, it meant something inside them was missing or worse, broken. You try a second bite, focusing on the contrast. You taste the forest floor, peaty rich, full of stories. The fat carries smoke from yesterday's fire. The berries snap bright like twigs underfoot. It's not just food, it's landscape. The spoon, smooth and oddly warm in your hand, vibrates slightly. Or maybe that's your imagination. Either way, you find yourself holding it with unusual care like a keepsake. She sees the way you grip it and says nothing, but her smile deepens. It's the kind of smile that knows something you don't. Historians still argue whether utensils like these, carved from animal bone and often buried with their owners, were ever truly meant for eating. Some claim they were ceremonial tools used only during certain festivals or in communion with spirits. Others believe they were simply practical, durable, easy to carve, and abundant in a land where antlers and bones outnumbered cutlery shops. You finish your plate. The bone spoon clinks gently as you set it down, and you half expect it to whisper. It doesn't. Not yet. She refills your bark cup with cold water and sprinkles in a few flakes of what looks like pine resin. The scent hits your nose like a cold snap, sharp, refreshing, medicinal. You drink, and your tongue feels cleaner, more alert. The witch says nothing, but she hums a strange, slow tune that loops in on itself like a forest path meant to lose travelers. The owl blinks in rhythm. A crow caws once in the distance, then stops as if embarrassed. You sit quietly, letting the taste of berries and bone fade from your mouth. You've stopped thinking of this as a meal. It's something else. A slow conversation between you, the forest, and the woman who knows all its secrets. The witch begins stirring something again. You hear the unmistakable sound of stones clinking. More breakfast is coming. Clink, clink, clunk. The sound is unmistakable. She's stirring stones into a pot. You lean forward and see her lift one from the embers with a pair of hooked iron tongs. The stone is dark red, almost glowing, like the heart of something once alive. With careful precision, she drops it into a bubbling pot of cloudy liquid, maybe broth, maybe something more ceremonial. The stone hisses as it vanishes beneath the surface, sending up a spout of steam that smells like root vegetables, ash, and something faintly metallic. She repeats this 5 more times, each stone a different size and color gray, speckled mossy green, a pale one with a crack like a lightning bolt down the middle. She places the empty tong down, wipes her hands on her apron, and looks directly at you. "How many sins do you carry?" she asks as casually as someone asking how you take your tea. You don't answer, mostly because you weren't expecting a quiz. No matter, she says and gestures at the pot. The stones remember, they cook what you deserve. That's the tone for the next course. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The practice of using heated stones in cooking is ancient and found worldwide, including among Finnish and Sami communities. When metal pots weren't available, stones were heated in fires and transferred into wooden or leather vessels to bring water to a boil. It was both cooking method and ritual performance heat, moving from earth to pot to stomach. The witch ladles out a murky serving of what looks like root mash. It's thick tan and clings to the wooden bowl like it has an opinion. Floating in it are chunks of turnip, a few translucent rings that might be onion or might be something else, and one single blackened stone still warm to the touch. You eat around it, she says. Or you don't. Depends how guilty you feel. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some versions of forest folklore, the number of stones added to a meal reflected the weight of someone's spiritual burdens. The more stones, the hotter the meal, the more intense the cleansing. It was said that if you swallowed a cleansing stone by mistake, you'd be forced to dream all your wrongdoings at once in a single night. Some people never woke up the same. You take your spoonwood this time, not bone, and stir the stew slowly. The surface ripples. The flavor is heavy, earthy, and strangely familiar. You're not sure if it's good, but it feels necessary, like taking bitter medicine after a strange dream. The stone in your bowl pulses faintly. You nudge it with your spoon, and it rotates, revealing a small spiral carved into one side. You don't ask questions. You just keep eating. She sits across from you now for the first time. Her bowl is identical, but her stone is bright white, almost glowing. She eats without a word, eyes closed, face peaceful. The owl hoots once low and deliberate. Historians still argue whether these cooking stones were purely functional or carried deeper meaning in isolated communities. Some archaeologists suggest the markings found on unearthed stones weren't accidents, but symbols, runes, blessings, or warnings. Others dismiss them as natural wear. The witch would laugh at that. She'd probably say, "The stone always knows when it's being doubted." You're halfway through your bowl when she speaks again. "Some stones come back," she says. "Refuse to stay buried, want another taste of fire." You pause, chewing. She gestures at the hearth, where a pile of older stones rests, each blackened and etched, each a relic of someone's breakfast, or maybe someone's judgment. You glance down at your own. The spiral glistens faintly. "Yours is still deciding," she says. "Don't rush it." You nod slowly and take another bite. The stew thickens as it cools. Each mouthful is heavier than the last, like it's building something inside you, or burning something away. When you're done, she takes your bowl, gently removes the stone, and places it into a basket with the others. You catch a glimpse. Some are cracked, some are chipped. One has a tiny tooth embedded in it. She wipes her hands again and sighs. "That's the worst of it," she says. Now comes the fun part. You're not sure what she means, but a new scent is blooming from a nearby cauldron, earthy, fungal, and maybe a little forbidden. The mushrooms are coming next. You hear the unmistakable rhythm of chopping, quick, confident, and irregular. You glance over and see her at a narrow table slicing a medley of mushrooms. Some are dull and familiar, soft brown caps with cracked tops and pale gills. Others are strange. One glows faintly green at the edges, another is black and bulbous, like it grew on a shadow. She doesn't wash them, she doesn't sort them. She just dices and hums, her curved knife flashing in the firelight. The pile grows steadily, an earthy, fragrant mound of forest offerings and possibly fever dreams. You clear your throat cautiously. Are all of those safe? She looks up with a smile that's too wide. "They're all interesting," she says. "Safety is for milk drinkers." You pretend that clears things up. Here's your mainstream historical fact: wild mushrooms are deeply embedded in Finnish cuisine and culture. The country's forests offer over 1,000 species, and for centuries foraging has been a part of everyday life. Even today, mushroom picking is a national pastime. But it comes with risk. Many species are toxic, and knowledge is passed down like heirlooms. She scoops the mushrooms into a thick wooden bowl, then tosses them into a smaller iron pot already bubbling with some sort of pale broth. A splash of hiss, and the aroma deepens. Now it smells like damp earth, caramelized roots, and something spiced that makes your eyes water. You notice she sets 3 mushrooms aside. One is pure white, one red speckled, and one with a deep purple hue like a bruise. She places them gently into a small cloth pouch and tucks it into her robe. You open your mouth to ask, then close it again. Now for your quirky tidbit. Forest witches were said to know mushrooms by emotion, not taxonomy. Happy ones made you laugh. Sad ones revealed your regrets. Angry ones, well, they were best left alone. A few witches were rumored to cultivate their own emotional gardens, nurturing fungi with whispered curses or lullabies depending on the kind of visions they wanted to invoke. The stew simmers, thickens, darkens. She adds a handful of dried herbs, then dips in a carved ladle and pours you a portion into a stone cup. The drink is thick, nearly opaque, with bits of mushroom floating like dreams waiting to surface. You sip. It's bitter at first, deep and woody, then sour like pickled air, then something unexpected sweetness, like brown sugar left too long in the rain. As you drink, your vision wavers ever so slightly. The edges of the hut seem softer, more fluid. The fire's crackle becomes a kind of music. The owl above seems larger, or maybe closer. She drinks too, her cup twice as full. You watch her eyes, there's no reaction, just calm, steady presence. The way trees look before they fall. She leans back on her stool, watching you. What do you see? You blink. Nothing. She nods. Then you're not ready. Historians still argue whether hallucinogenic mushrooms were actively used in Finnish folk magic. Some believe the association comes from the presence of Amanita muscaria, the iconic red and white toadstool found abundantly in the region. Others insist any so-called vision rituals were symbolic or misinterpreted by early anthropologists. But there are records, songs, stories, and even legal documents hinting at dream potions and sight broth in forest communities. The witch places a mushroom cap onto your empty plate. This one's simple brown and lightly grilled like it came from a tavern hearth. She sprinkles a few crushed fir needles on top and slides it toward you. A grounding bite, she says, keeps your soul from climbing out the mouth. You chew slowly. It tastes normal, smoky, a little nutty, but your hands feel steadier afterward. The room reassembles into its solid shape. The owl blinks once as if in approval. She collects your cup, tosses the remaining dregs into the fire, and lets the flame hiss. That was the forest talking, she says. Now it's your turn. You don't know how to respond, so you just sit with it. The flavor lingers. The flickers of strange light in the corners of your vision fade, but the feeling of something observed remains. More food simmers behind her, something hot, hearty, and spiced. You realize with a quiet certainty that this breakfast is far from over. You haven't even earned the porridge yet. She moves now with purpose, brushing aside old herbs and a stack of small bones to clear space for the centerpiece of the breakfast, a thick iron cauldron nestled into a ring of hot stones. Steam curls out in lazy tendrils, carrying a smell of toasted oats, cracked nuts, and something spicy clove, maybe, or dried wild ginger. This is porridge, but not like any porridge you've known. It's bubbling ominously, more like a potion in mid-incantation than a bowl of comfort food. You recognize the base barley and oats, the ancient grains of the north. Thick, rib-sticking fuel meant to last all day in the forest, but floating in the mixture are slivers of something gold, something red, and a few dark flecks that shimmer briefly as they pass through the steam. The witch reaches for a curved wooden stick and gives it a slow stir. The porridge folds gently obediently, as if listening. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Porridge, known as puro in Finnish, has been a central part of the Finnish diet since prehistory. Barley was one of the earliest cultivated grains long before wheat or rye took over. Breakfast porridge, often boiled with milk or water and sweetened with berries or butter, was both sustenance and ritual, especially on feast days or solstices. She ladles the porridge into 2 bowls, yours first. It's thick and lava-like, steaming furiously. She adds a drizzle of something from a tiny bottle wrapped in cloth. You catch a whiff, honey fermented, slightly laced with the sour tang of berries left too long in a jar. Then she pauses and looks at you very seriously. "This must be eaten hot," she says. "Hot enough to scald the tongue." You nod even though you're not sure why. If it cools too much, she continues, "Your day will rot from the center out." Now that doesn't sound like a metaphor. You raise your spoon and taste carefully. The porridge sears your tongue immediately, but beneath the heat, the flavor is complex roasted hazelnuts, a deep, grainy sweetness, and something herbal. It tastes like the moment just before sunrise, when the sky is still deciding whether to be pink or gray. She watches you chew. "That's the curse," she says. You swallow. "Sorry, what curse?" "The cold porridge curse," she explains. "Everyone who eats it lukewarm forgets something important before nightfall. Sometimes it's a word. Sometimes it's a face. Once a man forgot how to breathe." You raise an eyebrow, unsure whether to laugh or cough. Now, for your quirky tidbit. Some Finnish forest witches believed that porridge had a spirit of its own, particularly when cooked over open flame. If stirred the wrong way, counterclockwise, it could spoil your mood. If served too cold, it could sour your luck. Some would even sing to it while cooking, asking the grain for permission to nourish the soul. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic of food reverence or part of a deeper animist belief that all things, even porridge, had will and awareness. One 18th century cleric reportedly warned his parishioners not to mock food in forest regions, lest it be listening. The witch continues to eat with slow, deliberate bites. You notice she never lets her bowl cool for more than a few seconds. She speaks softly as she chews. This porridge remembers the hunt, remembers fire, remembers frost. You nod politely, trying not to let yours cool too much between spoonfuls. You can already feel it thickening, solidifying. You hasten your pace just a little. The owl shifts, the steam rises, the silence deepens. You finish the last spoonful just as a gust of wind shakes the shutters. The fire crackles louder, briefly flaring blue. She peers into your empty bowl and nods. "You made it," she says. "Made what?" "Through the first curse. There's a second." You set the bowl down gently. The taste lingers on your tongue, nutty dark, faintly metallic. The witch places both bowls on a shelf and pours water over the cauldron to douse the embers. The hiss is loud, angry, like something being silenced. You've survived the porridge, but you haven't yet earned the dessert. Or the truth. You hear a low whistle, not from the wind outside, but from inside the room, specifically from the drawer the witch just opened. It's filled with spoons, all shapes, all sizes, not stacked neatly, but bundled in what can only be described as organized chaos. Some are wood, some bone, a few metal, though tarnished with age. One looks like it's carved from a single crow feather, black and impossibly thin. The witch runs her hand over them, listening. You realize the whistling isn't in your imagination. The spoons are humming, low, breathy tones like wind through pine or the murmur of a choir underwater. She picks one out. It's plain wood except for a tiny red gem embedded in the handle. The hum stops as soon as it leaves the drawer. She hands it to you. "For the cloudberries," she says. She turns ladles something golden orange and shimmering from a pot near the edge of the hearth and drops 3 warm cloudberries onto your cleaned wooden plate. They gleam like little suns. Next to them, she sets a smear of white whipped cream, yogurt, no explanation. "You confess," she says, gesturing with her own spoon, one truth for each. You blink. Out loud. She shrugs. Louder is better. The berries like to hear. You glance at the owl. It is, as usual, watching. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cloudberries are a prized delicacy in Finland, especially in the far north. Golden in color, tart, and honey-like in flavor, they grow in the coldest, boggiest places, often where few other fruits dare survive. Traditionally eaten with cream, they're a sign of luck and abundance, but only if harvested with care. You pick up the humming spoon. It's silent now, warm in your hand. "I once stole a coat from a lost and found and pretended it was mine," you say quietly, spooning one glowing berry into your mouth. The flavor is electric sweet, sharp, and layered, like sunlight through fog. The witch nods. "Acceptable." You clear your throat. "I lied about why I stopped writing letters to my grandmother." Another berry. This one's warmer, riper. It leaves a film of honeyed regret on your tongue. She hears you now. The witch says softly, You hesitate before the third. I'm not sure I believe in magic, you say. The third berry bursts as it touches your lips. It's sweeter than the others, but there's a tang underneath, almost like sap. The cream beside it tastes like snow that fell on a summer afternoon. Soft, strange, impossible. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some folk witches believed that cloudberries could hold memory. When picked under moonlight and left on a windowsill, the berries were said to absorb secrets from the air. Eating them would then return those secrets, or pass them on. You swallow, and the humming spoon trembles in your hand. Not unpleasantly, more like it's vibrating with agreement. The witch takes it from you, gently lays it back in the drawer, and whispers something to it. The drawer emits one brief, happy sigh before falling silent. Historians still argue whether these singing spoon legends were based on actual ritual practice or romantic embellishments by 19th century folklorists. Some say it was all poetic license. Others suggest the spoons were used as divination tools, different timbres signaling different spirits. A few museums in Lapland still display rune-etched utensils labeled Lalus Taimit or song spoons. You sit back, the taste of truth still lingering in your mouth. The witch does not smile, but her eyes soften. You've fed the meal now, she says. It's only fair, it feeds you back. You don't ask what that means. You're beginning to understand that explanations rarely help. She starts boiling something pale and frothy in a small wooden bowl. You smell milk, but there's no cow in sight. And you remember something she said earlier about milking the wooden cow. It's time for something strange. Stranger than a spoon that sings and a porridge that curses. Stranger than truth-telling berries. She gestures toward the far corner of the room, where you now see, yes, what is unmistakably a wooden cow. Not a carving, not a sculpture. A life-sized hollow cow patched together from planks and bound with iron nails and sinew. Its eyes are inset with polished amber, giving it a strange warmth. Its udders are carved from birch burl, pale and bulbous. The entire thing rests on a bed of moss and straw, and as you stare, you could swear you see it. Breathing, or creaking, or both. Without comment, the witch grabs a small pail and kneels beside it. She presses her hand against the cow's flank and begins to milk it. Milk pours out, thick, white, and steaming. You blink slowly, your brain scrambling for logic. But logic has long since packed its bag and headed for the road. Witch milk, she says. Rich in memory. Very calming. She pours it into a carved mug and slides it to you across the table. You cup it with both hands. It's warm, sweet-smelling, and velvety in texture, like steamed cream, blended with vanilla and pine sap. One whiff, and your muscles slacken. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Finnish folk traditions include a variety of enchanted or supernatural animals, often bound to the forest or household. While wooden cows don't appear in most ethnographic records, wooden tools used in cattle rituals do, especially to protect against illness, ensure fertility, or ward off evil milk, which was believed to come from cursed or envious neighbors. You sip the milk. It's perfect, creamy with just the right balance of sweetness and warmth. And yet there's an undertone, something ancient. A flavor that's more feeling than taste, like rocking gently in a boat under a sky full of clouds that remember your name. The witch sits opposite you, holding her own cup. She drinks with reverence, eyes closed, her breath rising in soft clouds. You risk a question. Where does the milk come from? She opens one eye. The cow, she says. You stare at the wooden beast, but it's not alive. Her lips curl. She is just not the way you understand. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some witches in northern forest cultures believed in Puilimit tree animals, not living creatures in the usual sense, but spirits inhabiting crafted wooden forms. If carved under specific moon phases and fed with song and smoke, these vessels could house temporary souls, spirits of helpful animals long gone. Milk-producing ones were especially rare and highly prized. You glance at the cow again. Its eyes glint back at you, not malevolently, just knowingly. The milk settles warmly in your belly. You feel calmer, less like a visitor, more like someone slowly being folded into the forest's pages. The witch sets her cup down. Now feed them, she says. She hands you 3 scraps of food, a berry, a bit of rye bread, and a sliver of smoked fish. She points to the window ledge where a stone slab sits engraved with shallow runes. For the ones you can't see, she explains, they always eat first. You walk over, set each piece gently on the stone. Outside, the woods are silent, but the air shifts just slightly, like something unseen has paused to watch. You return to your seat. The witch nods satisfied. Historians still argue whether these spirit offerings were meant literally or symbolically. Some say they were just acts of respect designed to keep natural forces in balance. Others believe they were true negotiations, appeasements to the unseen entities of the land, especially in liminal spaces like deep forests, caves, or crossroads. The milk is gone. The wooden cow stands still, serene. The witch stands too, placing her hand on its flank. "Good girl," she whispers. "You've done enough for today." You'd thank it if you weren't still busy trying to accept that you've just had breakfast milked from lumber. She stokes the fire. Something thick and dark begins to bubble again. The scent is wilder this time, richer. Next, she says, comes the part we saved from last winter's last bear. You swallow, whether in anticipation or apprehension, you're no longer sure. She lifts the lid of a cast iron pot, and the scent hits you like a bear's breath. Warm, musky, meaty, and utterly wild. Inside, something thick and golden brown clings to the sides in slow, heavy ripples. She stirs it with the end of a carved antler. You recognize it now, rendered bear fat. She ladles a generous scoop over the remnants of your cloudberry plate. The fat melts as it hits, spreading into a glossy sheen, soaking into the wood like varnish. Then she sprinkles something on top, powdered spruce tips, dried mushroom shavings, and a few crushed juniper berries. A finishing flourish. A spell in spice form. This, she says reverently, is from the last bear. Not just any bear, the last one. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Bear hunting has a long and spiritual history in Finnish and Sami culture. The bear, or karhu, was both feared and revered, believed to be a creature of immense power and mystery. Its fat, in particular, was thought to carry strength, warmth, and vitality through the coldest months. Eating it wasn't just sustenance, it was communion. You take a bite of the now glazed berries. The sweet-sour tang meets the deep, buttery richness of the fat in a way that feels elemental, like fire meeting snow. The flavor coats your tongue and somehow settles behind your eyes. You blink once, twice. Everything feels a little slower, but also clearer. Oh, the last bear, she repeats, staring into the fire. Each year, one gives itself, not because it has to, because it knows. The land needs it. You glance toward the door, half expecting a bear-shaped shadow to be watching. Now, for your quirky tidbit, it was believed that the spirit of the final bear, killed in a season, would linger in the bones and fat unless honored properly. Some witches performed rituals to thank the bear, laying out meals, singing to its spirit, or using its fat in ceremonial dishes meant to pass on the bear's wisdom and dreams. In some villages, the bear's skull was hung high in a tree facing east so it could return to the stars. The witch picks up her own plate and with great ceremony eats a single bite. Then she nods to the owl. "You want some?" You almost laugh, but the owl hops down from the beam, glides soundlessly to a low perch, and pecks once at a berry left on the offering stone. You don't laugh. The witch swirls her finger through the melted fat and draws a circle on the wooden table. Strength doesn't come from chewing harder, she says. It comes from remembering what chewed you. You aren't entirely sure whether she means life or an actual bear, possibly both. Historians still argue whether bear fat was considered literal medicine or spiritual essence. Some say it was just a calorie-dense winter staple. Others believe it was treated more like a sacrament, used sparingly, ritually never wasted. One 17th century account describes a feast where the bear fat was passed from hand to hand without cutlery, each person expected to rub it into their palms before tasting as a kind of skin-bound gratitude. You glance at your hands slick with a bit of fat and cloudberry juice. They feel heavier, more rooted. The witch collects the plates and without breaking eye contact throws the scraps into the fire. The flames rise briefly, curling green at the edges before settling into orange. Now she says you've eaten the end of winter. Let's see if you're ready for spring. You don't reply. You're still tasting bear. The owl hops back to its rafter. The wind outside hushes as if waiting. The witch begins gathering small bundles of twigs, eggshells, and stones, assembling something like a ritual, or maybe just another course. You wonder how long this breakfast will last, and how much of you will still be you when it ends. The witch lays out 3 flat stones on the table, each the size of a saucer, and stained with heat marks, ash, and faint symbols that shimmer faintly when viewed from the corner of your eye. She arranges them into a triangle, then places a strip of moss, a pinch of ash, and a dried leaf on each. "These are their plates," she murmurs, gesturing toward the darkened corners of the hut. You don't see anyone, but the room has shifted again. It feels more occupied now, as if the wooden beams and smoke curls and shadows themselves have grown ears. She places small offerings on each stone: a crust of bread, a smear of berry, a slice of charred root. With each placement, she says something low and rhythmic in a language that doesn't rhyme with any you know. You glance toward the window. No movement outside, but a pressure builds in your ears like the air is listening. Then she gestures for you to add something. "A bite for the watchers," she says. You look at your plate, pick up a berry that had rolled to the side, and gently place it on one of the stones. The moment it touches the stone, it darkens slightly, as if the light no longer wants to touch it. She nods approvingly. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many ancient and early modern Finnish households maintained traditions of feeding house or forest spirits. These unseen beings, sometimes referred to as haltijat, were believed to dwell in the hearth, the forest edge, or even in the walls. Feeding them kept harmony. Ignoring them brought mischief, or worse. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some witches claimed that you could sense whether a spirit accepted your offering by the taste of your next bite. If it tasted bitter, something had been offended. If it tasted sweet, your gift was welcomed. If the food vanished entirely overnight, well, you'd better hope they weren't still hungry. You return to your seat, unsure of the verdict. She passes you another small dish, this time filled with finely minced roots, pickled in something dark and sweet. Parsnip burdock. You take a cautious bite. It's not sweet, not bitter either, just flat the flavor of dust and memory. She chuckles softly. They're still deciding. The owl hoots once. The candles flicker. The stones on the floor look warmer now, like something sitting on them. She turns away from the table lights, a long braided bundle of dried herbs, and lets the smoke curl through the room. The scent is heavy juniper spruce and something floral that prickles the back of your throat. The air thickens. Then she begins to sing. It's not a melody, not in the way you understand. It's more like a string of notes that rise and fall like breath, a lullaby for stones, a hymn for dust. The fire dims slightly. The owl lowers its head and closes one eye. You watch the 3 stones. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, one by one, the offerings begin to smolder, slowly, silently, like embers burning backward. The crust of bread vanishes into a curl of blackness. The smear of berry sizzles and shrinks. The charred root melts into the stone like wax into parchment. You don't speak. You don't move. You don't even blink. She finishes her song and snuffs the braided herbs with a twist of moss. "Fed and pleased," she says. "You may eat again." Historians still argue whether these spiritual breakfast rituals were ever truly practiced, or if they're exaggerated through folklore. Some say early anthropologists confused private prayer with spirit offerings. Others point to consistent oral accounts across regions suggesting these small, quiet rites were foundational meals shared with more than mouths. You look down at your empty bowl. You're still hungry, but not for food. The witch begins arranging the final course of the morning, lifting a small pot from the coals with a thick cloth. It smells like salt and fire and something long extinct. She sets the final pot down with reverence. It's round and dented, blackened by decades of smoke, and so heavy that even the table groans. When she lifts the lid, a breath of deep winter rises out, smoky, rich, fatty, and old. The scent is animal, yes, but not fresh. This has been waiting. This, she says, is the fat of the last bear. You blink. Didn't we already? She smiles slow and sly. That was a taste. This is the blessing. She stirs the contents gently with what looks like a claw, and as the fat shifts, it glows faintly like sunlight caught in a snowdrift. The surface is layered golden oil atop dark meat speckled with crushed juniper and what might be dried nettles. She spoons a portion onto a slab of toasted bark and sets it before you. It sloshes thickly, glistening like molten amber. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Bear fat was once a treasured resource in Nordic and Arctic regions, used not only in cooking, but in medicine, leatherworking, and even ritual anointing. It was considered a bridge between worlds, the living animal, and the spirit it left behind. The final bear of the season especially was often given symbolic weight. Now for your quirky tidbit. Forest witches sometimes believed the last bear of winter didn't die, it chose to become food. Its fat was thought to hold memories of every meal it ever ate, every scent it followed through the trees. By consuming it, you absorbed not just strength, but knowing. The knowing of roots, frost, prey, and predator, a quiet omniscience. You dip your fingers into the fat. There are no spoons this time. The witch insists it's to close the circuit, whatever that means. You touch it to your tongue, and you see, not visions, not dreams, but moments. A stream rushing under ice, the crunch of fresh snow, the hot breath of fear in the throat of something being chased, the slow satisfaction of a den made warm with pine. You blink hard, trying to separate your thoughts from someone or something else's. She watches you with an expression halfway between pride and pity. Strong enough, she says. The taste lingers dense and primal. It's not good in the way honey or berries are good, but it is necessary, like truth, like confession, like winter itself. The witch takes her own portion, smears it across her palm, and presses it to her chest. She closes her eyes and hums a note so low it vibrates through the floor. Fat is memory, she whispers. Memory is strength. Strength is what you'll need. You ask, need for what? She opens her eyes slowly. Spring. Historians still argue whether these rituals of consumption were spiritual in nature or purely practical survival ceremonies. Some say the final bear was shared among the whole village. Others insist it was reserved for the wise women, the dream guides, the soul keepers, people like her. You finish the fat wiping your fingers on a piece of moss she provides. The taste lingers in your teeth, your nose, your bones. The hut feels quieter now. The fire has burned low. The owl is asleep finally. The witch begins to gather the dishes. Not quickly. Each one is handled with care. Each wiped with a sprig of fur or bundled straw. Each stacked in silence. You've eaten well, she says. You nod. But the meal's not done. You blink. There's more. She gestures to the window where the sky has begun to pale. One more sip, she says, before the forest forgets you. Your breath catches. You weren't expecting goodbye to come so soon or so softly. She turns toward a tall bottle wrapped in birch bark and sealed with wax. Something sweet and sharp and final waits inside. The wax seal pops with a dry snap, and the bottle exhales a breath that smells like honey, soaked in smoke with a sting of sap and stone. She tilts it gently over a pair of tiny, uneven wooden cups, no taller than your thumb, filling each with a thick amber liquid that moves like melted gold in slow motion. She hands you one. Sip slowly, she says. It's the end of the beginning. The cup is warm in your fingers, the wood polished smooth by time and touch. The liquid shimmers, catching the light of the nearly dying fire. You lift it to your nose. The scent is layered. Fermented berries, resin, maybe mushrooms. It shouldn't work, but it does. It smells like a memory wrapped in frost. You ask her, what is it? She lifts her own cup. Last sip, last memory, last door. She clinks her cup gently against yours, and in that moment, every sound in the hut stills, even the fire seems to hush. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In some Finnish traditions, homemade herbal liqueurs or meads were brewed in the darkest months as celebratory or ceremonial drinks. They often included forest ingredients, cloudberries, pine needles, wild honey, and sometimes a small amount of fungus believed to widen the mind. These drinks were rare, reserved for rites of passage partings and spiritual milestones. Now, for your quirky tidbit forest, which is believed that the final drink of any feast or day or dream had power. It wasn't just digestion, it was direction. If you finished it too fast, you might forget something. If you left a drop behind, it could whisper secrets to whatever spirit found it next. There was an old saying, the last sip watches where you go. You take yours slow. The flavor is like no other sweet yes, but dense with meaning. It coats your mouth and slides behind your eyes. You feel your shoulders ease, your hands relax. Your heartbeat drifts into rhythm with the ticking of the cooling stones beneath your feet. The witch is quiet now. She sips her drink, eyes closed, swaying slightly as if listening to something deep inside the walls. Then she speaks. Not to you, not exactly. To the trees, she murmurs, to the sky, to the snow that hasn't fallen yet. You lower your cup, the last drop clinging to the bottom like a tiny amber eye. She takes it gently from your hand, sets both cups on a high shelf, and wraps them in a piece of black cloth embroidered with red thread. They'll wait there, she says, until you return. You're about to protest, about to say that this was a one-time thing, that you're just passing through, but the look she gives you stops your words. You never visit a forest witch, once she says. Historians still argue whether these parting rituals were about preservation of spirit or simply good manners. Some believe the final sip was linked to the ancient belief in henki, the vital breath or essence of a person. Drinking slowly and with purpose kept your henki intact, especially when you were about to re-enter the waking world. The witch walks over to the door. She doesn't open it yet. She just rests her hand on the frame. The owl stirs one last time. You feel the hut exhale like a lung full of secrets, finally relieved. You'll forget parts, she says softly. It's how it works. But you'll know you were fed. The fire dims. The stones cool. The last flavor fades from your mouth like fog lifting from a lake. And outside, the forest begins to call you back, not loudly, not urgently, just inevitably. The door creaks open. A breeze enters cold and fresh like clean linen or the first page of a new book. You step toward it not quite ready but no longer afraid. The witch nods once. You nod back. No words, no goodbye. You step into the pale morning, and behind you the hut breathes once more and disappears. The trees greet you in silence as you step back into the forest, though they feel different now, less like obstacles and more like old witnesses. The snow crunches under your feet, but softly, as though muffled by unseen ears. The air is crisper, and you swear it carries the faintest hint of cloudberry and juniper, as if the forest itself is remembering the breakfast you just had. You walk slowly, not because you're lost, but because some part of you wants to stay just a little longer in the glow of that strange, enchanted warmth. You glance back instinctively, expecting to see the moss-roofed hut nestled between the firs. But it's gone. Not hidden, not faded, just not there anymore. You run a hand across your coat. There's still a smear of bear fat on your sleeve. Your lips are sticky with something honeyed. Proof. Maybe. And then the wind shifts. It carries a new smell, faint, familiar, savory. You follow it. Soon, you see the source another small clearing. A ring of stones, a log bench, a kettle over a fire that you didn't start, but someone did. And resting on the edge of the fire, balanced like it's always belonged, there is a long wooden spoon. Just waiting. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Finnish mythology, the forest is not just a place. It is an entity. It is called metsä, and it has moods, rules, and memory. Certain spots within it were believed to be Veki-charged places where the boundaries between worlds thinned. Travelers who entered them were not the same when they emerged. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some witches believed that when you left a proper forest breakfast unfinished, the forest itself would finish it for you and then send you a dream about what it liked best. These dreams were not to be taken lightly. They could reveal lost paths, old names, or warnings wrapped in riddles. The fire ahead burns steadily, but there's no one tending it. Just the spoon, just the pot. You sit on the bench, wary but calm. You look inside. Porridge again. But this time, it's lighter oats instead of barley, seasoned with something floral. You dip your finger in. It's the exact temperature of comfort. She's not here. But maybe that's not true. Maybe she's in the steam rising from the pot. Maybe in the pattern of the bird tracks around the edge of the clearing. Maybe in the way the owl above, perched impossibly still on a branch, closes its eyes the moment you meet its gaze. You eat. Each bite is warm but not sleepy. Filling, but not heavy. You begin to feel awake in a new way, as if your limbs have remembered what they're for. And as you eat, you feel something familiar settle into your bones. A rhythm, a pulse. You were fed. You were watched over. You were measured. You were not found lacking. Historians still argue whether forest breakfasts in their oldest forms were just about nourishment, or were themselves full rituals meant to ground people in a world too large to understand. Some say witches invented elaborate meals to keep villagers respectful of nature. Others believe nature simply spoke through them, and breakfast was the only language quiet enough to hear it. You finish the porridge. You stand slowly. The spoon remains humming faintly. You don't take it. You leave it there as it should be. And you walk on full not just of food, but of something else, something slower, older, something watching kindly from the roots. As you walk deeper into the forest, you begin to notice something curious. You're not quite following a path. You're being drawn. The birches lean slightly inward. The moss beneath your boots thickens, muffling your steps. There's no wind, and yet the branches above sway ever so gently, as though parting just for you. You pause beside a tree marked with horizontal scars, 3 deep grooves etched into the bark, not by claws, not by knives, by time. A boundary marker, perhaps, or a door. You press your palm to it. The bark feels warm. Then in the distance you hear it again, the low whistle of a spoon drawer. You smile. You're not surprised. Here's your mainstream historical fact in many Finnish and Karelian traditions. The forest wasn't a place you conquered, it was a place you courted. Travelers spoke aloud when entering it. Hunters offered thanks to trees and stones. And if you wanted to come back safely, you tied bits of cloth or ribbon to branches as a promise to return, to remember, to respect. You spot one now, fluttering on a pine bough, ahead a strip of gray wool, frayed at the edge, tied with a loop no human fingers could have made so small. You keep walking. Now, for your quirky tidbit, forest witches were said to bury small tokens of breakfast, an eggshell, a used spoon, a dollop of porridge as a way of pinning down their presence so the forest wouldn't forget them between visits. They called it jury, or rooting. A trick to remind the land that you once belonged here, even if only for a morning. As you move forward, you find one of these tokens. A flat stone with 3 berries dried onto its surface, arranged in a spiral. You kneel beside it. Something in you knows it was left for you. Maybe not by her, but by something with the same kind of knowing. You don't touch it. You just sit beside it for a while, listening. There's no bird song, just the crackle of old ice shifting under the moss. A silence so deep it hums. You reach into your pocket almost without thinking and find something you didn't put there. A spoon, small, bone carved with a swirl. You turn it in your hand. The hum is faint, but real. The forest knows you now. Historians still argue whether these tokens were physical acts or mental ones, rituals enacted or imagined. But the argument is always the same. Was this all superstition, or was it belief in a language too quiet for scholars to hear? You rise. The spoon warms in your hand. You press it to the bark of the scarred tree. Then you walk again. This time, the forest isn't just around you, it's walking with you. You reach a clearing not marked on any map, a wide, flat circle surrounded by elder trees, each one gnarled and slouched like sleeping giants. The snow here is untouched, pristine, and in the center stands a stump clean-cut as if freshly hewn despite its age. Around its base are small objects arranged with deliberate care, an acorn, a candle nub, a folded leaf, and strangest of all, a perfectly preserved slice of black bread untouched by rot or time. You know without knowing how that you're meant to sit, so you do. The stump is warm beneath you. No fire, no wind, just you, the spoon, still humming quietly in your pocket, and the sense of being inside the heartbeat of the forest. Here's your mainstream historical fact in ancient Finnish beliefs. Certain places in the woods were known as haisai, sacred groves, or power spots believed to be the dwelling places of spirits' ancestors or old gods. These locations were rarely marked. You simply knew when you stood in one, and when you did, you were expected to sit quietly, observe, and offer silence in place of speech. Now for your quirky tidbit. Witches sometimes spoke of the final plate, not a real dish, but a symbolic course served after all meals in solitude in nature. It was meant to seal the meal within you, like stitching the lining of a coat. They believed that if you ate well but never listened after the food's magic would leak away before morning. So you sit, you breathe, you let the weight of the breakfast settle deeper, each dish you've eaten sinking like a stone through water, sending ripples through your memory. The bone broth, the solstice egg, the mushrooms with names too strange to repeat, the fat of the last bear. Each one was more than food. Each one was a kind of spell. You reach into your coat and take out the spoon. You place it gently on the bread at the base of the stump, and something changes. The air hums just faintly. The frost on the branches begins to melt upward against gravity. A single pine cone drops from nowhere, lands beside your foot, then slowly begins to open, as if in bloom. You don't smile, you don't speak. You just know. You're full now, not just of food, but of memory of forest, of something borrowed and briefly held. And in that fullness, a new kind of hunger is born. Not for more food, but for return. Historians still argue whether this final plate ritual was real or symbolic, personal or public. Some say it was just the afterglow of a ritual feast. Others say it was a necessary completion, a moment of stillness that gave shape to the magic. The forest doesn't argue. It never does. It simply remembers. And now it remembers you. By the time you stand, the clearing feels different. Not darker, just deeper. You step lightly now, as if moving through someone else's dream. The air is warmer despite the snow, and everything trees wind, even time feels paused, as if the forest is waiting to see what you'll do next. You follow a winding trail that didn't exist a moment ago. It curls gently between birches and dips under pine boughs, leading you along without words. The spoon is gone, left on the stump, but you don't feel empty. If anything, you feel carried. Your breath rises in small clouds. Your boots barely crunch. You've been fed by more than food. You've eaten stories, fragments of knowing little bites of someone else's truth wrapped in fire and ash. And now you're being walked out, not dismissed, escorted. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. In many pre-Christian belief systems throughout Finland, journeys through the forest weren't just physical. They were understood to be layered with spiritual meaning. Entering the woods could be an act of prayer, confession, or rebirth. And returning meant something had changed. Not always visibly, but always meaningfully. And now, for your last quirky tidbit. Some witches spoke of the backward footprints, marks you'd never see, but always left behind. After a sacred meal in the woods, it was believed your soul walked ahead of you on the way out. Your body followed its lead. And if you turned back before you left the trees completely, your soul might choose to stay. So you don't look back, not even once. The trees open ahead of you. Light filters in a softer sun, not harsh like noon, but not veiled like dawn either. A time between times. You step through the last ring of trees and emerge where the moss thins and the roots let go. You're no longer in her world, or perhaps now her world walks a little with you. The wind resumes. A single crow takes flight silent and sure. You look at your hands. They're the same, but not quite. Maybe it's the way they move, or the weight they carry now. The taste of juniper and bear fat has faded, but the shape of the memory is still there, like a scent trapped in cloth. And, if you ever go back, the door will still be there, somewhere. Behind birch and shadow, beneath the owl's gaze, beside a wooden cow that breathes. Because forest witches never truly vanish. They just steep into the moss. You walk forward slower now, full watched, remembered. And now, you let yourself sink into stillness. Let the rhythm of that forest breakfast settle low in your belly. You're not hungry, not anymore. You're held by roots, by steam, by the memory of flavors you didn't know could exist. The fire has burned down to embers. The owl is quiet again. And somewhere beneath moss and snow, the bones of ancient meals sleep beside secrets too gentle to shout. Your breath deepens. The air around you softens. Each limb loosens in turn your jaw, your shoulders, your hands. Even your thoughts begin to float less like logs in a stream and more like leaves drifting slowly to earth. You remember the warmth of the witch's hut, the hum of spoons, the silence between words. You remember a truth told to a berry, a final sip that opened a door, and the soft sound of the forest remembering your name. But you don't need to carry it all, not tonight. Let it settle, let it steep. And if your dreams bring you back to that mossy doorway, if you smell cloudberries or hear the quiet clink of stones in a pot, don't be afraid. She's just making breakfast again, and she remembers exactly how you like it. Now close your eyes, rest. You're safe here. You're full. You're home.